All right. Hey, we're a wee bit late, but it is the World War I stream, and this week the United States enters the war, so that should be entertaining. MC, go ahead and get us started.
Okay, this is the month Mad Dodge has been waiting for, and that's not going to happen quite yet, but pretty soon. We'll start with April 3rd. The HMS Jason, all right, which is a torpedo gunboat, was sunk by a mine off the coast of Scotland. All right, so what's happening here is the Germans are mining both ends of the coastline. Right, they're trying to mine all the approaches that you can going into Great Britain. Mm-hmm. Then you have Kahakan, all right, is occupied again by the Russian forces. All right, if we take a little map and we go on over to the Middle East, you're talking in this area over here. They're seizing this area away from the Ottoman Turks. The German withdrawal to the Hindenburg Line is completed, which we talked about last time, right? And the British government informed the Russian Provisional Government of their adherence to the principle of independent and united Poland. In other words, they're trying to convince the Russians that when the war is over, there will be a country called Poland created.
Yeah, it's like we got this little agreement, guys. We're just really suggesting that you uphold it with us.
Yes. All right. That there's going to be an independent Poland. And then Woodrow Wilson asks for a declaration of war against Germany, and the United States Congress approves a declaration of war against. Now, initially, it's strictly against Germany. And it's strictly against Germany because Germany is the one who issued the unrestricted submarine warfare. The next day of the following...
Well, no, real quick. Like I'm going to let you pass that up. All right. Okay, so in World War II, the United States unanimously declared war on Japan. Was it unanimous
No.
in World War I? I didn't think so. Elaborate.
Well, there was a couple of outliers. I mean, was it mostly unanimous? Was it bipartisan? Yes, but I think there was up to like 10 people said no, voted against the resolution. It was damn near unanimous.
Okay, fair enough. You can go ahead and move on. I just wanted to cover that little part there because we are going to begin mobilizing, and it's a slow process. That's for sure.
Well, Cuba and Panama didn't declare war on Germany. Now, the reality of this is, does that really have much of an effect? First of all, like for Cuba, no. All right, I mean, what it does do is it says any of the commerce raiders or anything from that's German or can be considered German can be seized as war booty. All right. The Panama Canal, I think, is under construction. If I'm not mistaken, I don't think it was finished construction yet.
Still under construction yet, but you'll find that with Panama in particular, they're siding with or declaring war on Germany and siding with the Americans because of the American interests with the canal itself.
Correct, and that was something that could it have an effect over the long term, possibly, but really in this case, not yet.
It was more or less we're siding with our neighbors.
Yeah,
but
yeah. We know where this is going now. We're going to side with you guys, so we're not with them, so don't worry about us.
It was more along the lines of, yeah, I don't want to side against the United States, and us basically telling them how we're going to work there.
Because this also does reflect on back where we were saying about the Commonwealth and all this, not knowing where America is going to side and all this kind of stuff. Just before April 7th, Cuba and Panama were still just dealing as if they were just normal folks around the world and all this kind of shit. And they were sort of thinking the same thing too. It's sort of like, well, where the Americans go, we'll go because, well, they're basically going to be the linchpin that's going to decide this. So when America says, right, we're jumping here, the other two go, right, well, we'll jump with you. because that's who's going to win.
Well, to a large extent, you're right. So, all right. Then you have Austria-Hungary severs diplomatic ties with the United States, and of course, because they're obviously they're trying to protect their allies. The battles of Arras and the Artois and Champagne offensive begins,
And the Battle of Vimy Ridge and the Battle of Scarpe. With the Battle of Vimy Ridge is supposed to be a blocking attack by the British. The Battle of Arras, Artois, and the Champagne battles. There's another one, Battle of the De Mont or something like that. The Battle of the Hill. This is Joffrey's replacement. What was his name?
Pieton.
Neville. It was Neville that did this.
Oh,
this
Neville.
Yeah, and this is his fucking brilliant idea. You remember what Joffrey did last year? That didn't work. Let's try that again. Yep.
Well,
and
there was an expectation. All right, you got to remember that the Germans had pulled back, so they had an idea that maybe they could push through this time. It was not a good idea, but it was the idea was there.
Yeah. Obviously, it's not going to go well.
And they once again some local gains, not a whole lot out of either one of these battles. What I like about this is you can see some of the battle pictures. You notice that they're showing the French line. Prior to this, you can see how there was some hills. In reality, what was happening with this is the Germans had dug in, and this is an example of it. Let me see if I can blow this up for everybody here. This is what the Germans had done. All right, they had dug tunnels so when the assault came, they had plenty of warning that the assaults were coming, and then they would run onto the other side of the tunnels. And basically what happened is the French, they were actually able to come all the way up here and take the ridge line, but the Germans had already had dug in positions right here, which the French didn't know about, and they stopped them on the top of the summit. So now this is a tactical loss by the Germans, all right? But at the same time, it's a very horrible position to be in because while they're on top of the summit, your artillery, the German artillery can see them, and they basically start raining in artillery. All right, so in order to keep the summit, you don't want to stay on the summit very long because artillery is going to rain on you. All right. Meanwhile, the German positions on the other side, all right, the artillery, you're going to have to use some kind of plunging fire against that, and it's going to have to be indirected or directed fire from line of, because you don't have anything line of sight. You don't have the artillery to be able to see where the Germans are. And a huge battle takes place along these lines, right along this ridge line. And the Germans, of course, the problem, of course, for the Germans is they can't see what the French are building up now on the other side. And as a result, they attempt a series of counteroffensives at the end of this, all right, to try and take them off the ridge. It's just horrible losses for the Germans as well. This first part of the offense actually captured over 6,000 Germans.
Okay, so when the Germans fell back to the Hindenburg Line, though, the French and British troops immediately moved forward to challenge them.
No,
not immediately.
They didn't.
Which is the
problem. This is actually a thing with this particular battle here, and as part of another noteworthy thing is this Neville bloke had spent so much time convincing the French government and the hierarchy and all this kind of stuff that this Joffrey plan would still work this time, that when it didn't, this is actually the actual part where everyone just goes, look, well, okay, the French government, obviously you can't organise a fucking brothel, so, right, and this is the point where it's like everyone just dissolves.
Okay, but my point was, at this point, you've gotten word that, as you guys put it, the Yanks are joining the war, and they're on your side. So why don't you just take over the German positions, solidify your line, get your injured to the back, fresh troops to the front, and wait for the Americans to show up.
Okay.
Why
You mean
actually
the positions that they left?
When the Germans pull back to their
Right.
strategic position?
What happens when you take over an enemy trench line?
Well, there's an even bigger point that you've completely missed, Dodge, and that is we've been talking about this for a few episodes now, and that is how little prepared America was for an actual war. Sure, you could muster up the blokes and stick them in uniforms and stuff, but as for them pointing the gun in the right direction and hitting something, it's a completely different story. So while yes, America has joined, we're really not expecting you guys to actually pull a trigger for another 6 to 8, even 12 months.
Right.
Exactly, and a lot of people don't think about this, but today, everyone knows how to use a bolt-action rifle. Back then, bolt-action was still very, very new, and your average civilian passed a single shot. He had never used one, so hand him a rifle, hand him some stripper clubs, and he has no idea what to do. You've got to teach the basics to them.
We're not even at that. To be honest, we're not even at that point. You're going to see something a little bit later. All right, that's going to show you just how slow things move. Fardy's exactly right, but there's another aspect of this, and that is when you take over the enemy's lines, you take over their positions. They know where those positions are.
Yeah, and so they've already got them pre-sighted.
Since they've already sighted where those positions are, once you get into that trench, they don't even have to aim. They've already got the gun sighted on you. They just start firing.
And also, too, you got to remember as well that, say for instance, you've just taken over a recently abandoned German trench that they've known you're coming, and they've had plenty of time to rig a few things up before they leave. You're also down in this trench trying not to fucking step on every single booby trap they've left behind, whilst also trying to do your job quickly and get out of there before you get bombed by artillery.
Well, no, that's a fair point, but even in World War II, if you look at Bastogne, just one piece of the Battle of the Bulge, the Germans knew exactly where the American entrenchment was, and they had the paratroopers surrounded, and they could have wiped them off. And you had Easy Company come in, having to reposition the same foxholes, okay? So that's kind of a moot point, in my opinion, because you saw the
different
same
situation.
thing.
That's a entire different situation.
They already knew where the positions were, though.
No. It's not. It's when you talk about artillery. All right, just because when you set up, all right, it's not a matter of you know exactly where they're at, but they've already had the guns sighted for that. All right. Sighting up artillery is you've already placed your artillery, you've already measured the distance, you've already fired, rounds to mark those areas. You don't even have to mark them now because you know what you need. All right, that's different than when you pull back and then have to try and reoccupy it again going forward because your artillery has to move back into place, and that isn't the. You see what I'm saying? Unless they've got a little plaque that says that you set it up on that artillery piece on the exact same site again, you're not going to be able to do that. Now, there were times what they would do that for, but different situation.
Yeah.
And
you have a point.
And in Bastogne as well, you kind of have to assume a little bit from the tactical mindedness of the time, right? The Germans are on the back foot and all this kind of stuff. Okay, they look like they're going to make a push. Now, what would you assume that'd be? They can't have aircraft because of the weather and all this kind of stuff. We've smashed them up. They're not really that organised, so we're not really expecting a massed artillery bombardment. So they're probably going to come with infantry and tanks. So that's why they just put foxholes in and all this. And they hadn't been alerted to the amount of artillery because most of the trees were still fairly in okay condition when they deployed into there. And it wasn't until they deployed then the Germans revealed that they got all these massed artillery. And that's destroying all the trees and all this kind of stuff. But they'd gone in with the right sort of mentality at the time that they were going to go up against infantry, that they were going to need foxholes and stuff to as defensive positions, not so much artillery.
Well, no, you have a point too, because the weather was so bad in Bastogne that the units were mixing. The German and American lines were, so it was a mess. Anyway, back to World War One. Go ahead.
Okay. The Admiral Sims from the United States Navy arrives in England.
Yep.
And the Russian provisional government issues a proclamation to Allied governments declaring in favor of self-determination of peoples and a durable peace. Basically stating what they're stating there is the monarchies will now be forced into democracies. So when they take over Austria-Hungary, the people will be allowed to vote. They're saying self-determination for all the areas that are formerly occupied by the Austro-Hungarian government. On the 10th of April, another British hospital ship, the Salta, is hit with a mine off of Havre. And for those who don't know,
That's in Africa.
No, Havre is right here, isn't it?
Oh, hang on, I'm thinking of Harrier. Never mind.
All right. It's basically in this area, right? I'm trying to remember exactly where it is, because what the ships were doing is they were coming from. Oh, here it is, right here, Le Havre, right here. They were just transporting the wounded back to Britain, and then they're basically trying to get them to either Southampton or over here to Plymouth, and then back. These were the two areas where the wounded were landing.
Okay, there's it's not this one. There is another one a couple of weeks where it's an actual ambulance ship, not a hospital ship, but I'll bring that up when I get to it.
Okay, you can tell us what the difference is, because I have no clue.
Oh, it's quite simple.
We'll worry about it. We'll worry about it then.
There's a modern day analogy that'll clear it right up for you.
Okay, Bulgaria severs diplomatic ties with the United States. Bulgaria being once again an ally of the Germans. Brazil severs diplomatic ties with Germany. Bolivia severs diplomatic ties with Germany. The Battle of Vimy Ridge and the Battle of Scarpe. All right, end. That was part of the battles that we were talking about before.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The battles of the hills and the monts. That's what you were talking about. And the third battle of Champlain.
La Bataille des Monts. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
All right. I want to go back to show you what this is the landscape that they're going through.
Wow, you can see why Tolkien. I don't know if he fought there, but just look at that and then read his books again. I'm just saying, you could tell he fought in this war.
he was in the Somme, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, well, the Somme's basically just over the road from where that is, pretty much. So, yeah, like...
Not that there's a lot of difference between the area of the Somme and this area at this point.
Well, at that point, the entire countryside has been so pounded by artillery and been trudged on by everyone's feet that it pretty much looks like a giant sea of mud.
Yeah, that's why I said it's pretty much just over the road at that point. Yeah, he was pretty much there, pretty much.
Yeah, that looks like orc territory to me, if I ever seen it.
And this is what their trenches. Now, this is something that people don't realize. Look how deep these trenches are.
I was thinking, look at how narrow they are, honestly. That's one man apart, right?
Well, that's a really, really simple trench. The trenches got, towards the end of the war, they got really, really complex, because when you dig a simple trench, just a ditch, and everyone's standing in the ditch, the water collects there. Well, crap! Now you got to deal with trench foot. Now you got to deal with erosion. And also you got to have places for people to sleep. You got to have the logistics becomes a nightmare. So they get incredibly complex.
And the narrowness of the trench was all in aid to try and help out with defeat and fragmentation from detonating shells overhead and stuff like that. So smaller the aperture, the smaller the space that the shell's fragments have got to go through, pretty much.
Well, and the more the harder it is. If a shell hits right here, it can kill a number of people. But if the shell hits like just right over here, it may not kill anybody. So you got to be extraordinarily accurate with pinpoint accuracy in order to actually hit the trench line, right? Mm-hmm. And they've learned to do certain things since then. All right, I mean even on top of that, but you can see another broader picture of the the landscape, if you call it landscape.
See, if
you
no
could
one had,
call it Mordor.
if
Now,
no one had said anything, you could swear, you could tell someone and convince them that was Gallipoli.
Oh God.
But look at this territory, and think about trying to run through this. Physically, you're trying to run from place to place in the mud, in the dirt. Okay, and this is what you're trying to run through.
If anybody out there has ever tried to run through a plowed field after it has rained, that's what you're running in. Soup.
Whilst trying to jump over barbed wire and fucking not trip over shit that's on the ground and not get blown up and not trip down in shell holes and go face first into some other hole.
And you can see the
Exactly,
French,
and there are
that's one of
bodies
those
everywhere.
larger French guns right here. But notice the carriage that it's on. It's still dealing with the old style wheeled carriage. Not much has changed, really.
Mm-hmm. And those wooden wheeled old carriage wheels, they'll still appear in the beginning of World War II.
Mm-hmm. And here you're seeing a list of where the French lines, well, the German lines were, and then after the attack where the German lines were. And you can tell this is less than 5 kilometers. It's less than a mile or 2 miles. All the way through here.
Yeah, that being said, though, they did push them back a little bit.
24,000 casualties.
Damn.
Yeah, I guess it's not worth it. Never mind.
Okay. The Second Battle of Gaza begins. The Japanese flotilla joins the Allied forces in the Mediterranean. The Japanese sailed all the way from the Pacific, all the way around the Horn of Africa, and into the Mediterranean. And then it goes to the British ambulance transports. La Franque and Dognal torpedoed and sunk in the English Channel. Okay, explain this.
Okay, right. Now, in modern day and age, right, if you're in a combat zone, you get injured, you'll go to the forward triage medical facility, and then they'll take you to someplace else if you needed a bit more care. And if you're really that bad, then that's the flight from fucking wherever to Vandenberg or fucking Ramenstein or whatever, take you to an actual proper hospital. So you've got your field hospitals on the ground. You got your ambulance ships that are actually in the conflict zone that are designed to be working as hospitals themselves. These ambulance ships and these ambulance transports, these are the C5 transports that are bringing you home. So these are full of guys that are that bad that they're just like, yeah, nah, you're so bad, we're sending you straight home into a proper hospital.
And basically, you killed all the people because you couldn't get them off the boat.
Pretty much.
All right, then you have the Battle of Gaza ends once again. For those who want to know the Gaza at this point in time, whoops, a little too far. They're talking this area right here. The British are moving along this road line, all right, to go forward to try and push into what the big prize, of course, is. The big prize is going to be Jerusalem. But then after Jerusalem falls, the next big prize, of course, is Damascus, which is right here. All right. So basically, there's going to be a big push to try and take Jerusalem and take Damascus. That's the intent. All right, the French offensive has stopped. The Second Battle of Anse and the Battle of the Hills ends. A second German destroyer raid on the Straits of Dover. All right, action by Swift and Broke. All right, basically that's action. What the Germans are trying to do now is they're trying to create a Jutland 2. Okay,
Electric Boogaloo.
Basically, and they're trying to do what they thought they had succeeded, which they had kind of had. All right, which was to take at least some of the major British firepower all right, from their ships, all right, the major capital ships, and carve off a large section of them that they could then defeat in detail. But the British, for the most part, they're just dealing with it. All right, they're not going to send out the Grand Fleet, all right, to deal with the High Seas Fleet again. All right, as long as they can keep the High Seas Fleet bottled up. If the High Sea Fleet sails, then they'll sail out to meet them, but they're not going to separate their forces in order to meet the High Seas Fleet.
See, the thing is, though, we had talked about this before. The High Seas Fleet was the Kaiser's wet dream, so he didn't want to risk it. But the fact is, okay, I know hindsight's 2020, but even then, they had to be looking at this and going, "We're running out of time, boys." Right? Break that blockade. Send everything you got if you're gonna lose anyway. Fuck it.
There's a point to be made with that for sure.
I don't think they had that mindset at that time. I think that would be a better thing to say next year when things are really starting to get desperate.
See, Dodge, it's one thing you've also got to realise too. It's one thing to just send a mechanical object out and just have it get destroyed for the sake of having it destroyed, but that mechanical object still got lots of people and lives and shit on there that like will die and get hurt and all this kind of shit. So, kind of want to think about them for a little bit, don't you?
Well, also keep in mind
what? Wait, real quick, I have to respond to that.
Okay.
You're totally being fair. You're right. Now let's look at the number of casualties that would come from a naval campaign versus the number that are happening daily on the Western Front. I think your theory falls apart, sir.
Well, no, not really, because you basically simply went to the whole, oh, well, we've got a dead bloke over there, so let's just kill a fuck ton of people over here. Like, if you're going to send, like, the whole point of the land battles is that they're trying to not kill everybody and actually get an objective. What you're suggesting with your naval forces is that you're just going to send them out to arbitrarily get destroyed.
No, I'm not. I'm saying you're sending them out to break the blockade come hell or high water.
Okay,
and
but
that's what you need to do.
But
there's another problem.
Okay, go ahead.
There's another problem, and it's logistics. This is not the Second World War with the United States, where every one of our destroyers that were sunk, we could replace with 4. They couldn't do that. If they lost half their fleet, that's a good 20 years until they can replace it.
Falcon, they lost their whole fleet. It's sitting in dock. Okay, you might as well mothball it.
Okay,
turn it into bullets.
Let me ask you a question. While they were in harbor, were they serving a purpose?
You might say they were. Me, it seems pointless. They just sat there the entire war.
Well, what purpose could they be serving?
They're protecting the harbor, whatever.
That's right. They're protecting the
starving in Germany.
They're protecting the coastline. Now, here's the thing to remember, Mad Dodge. Yeah, okay, what you're saying is true, but if there is no fleet there, then the British are able to land troops anywhere at will. Can you sustain that? If they put 30, 40, 50,000 men, all right, behind the German lines, can you handle that?
Yeah, I know. I'm not General Patton here, dude. Okay, I'm just saying.
Well, no shit.
No shit. Would you rather be starved out? Because that's what happened.
Well,
and
okay.
Hey, I bet you best believe if the Confederates had that many ships just chilling in Virginia, they would have ran them right at the Yankees.
And they would have been sunk just like the Virginia was. But we won't go into that.
Well, there's one answer to your are they serving a point business, and that is yes. While they are sitting in port and they're not out at sail, they're not at threat, so they're not going to be attacked. Therefore, their crews aren't getting hurt.
There is that.
Also, you can train more people.
That's true.
Their crews were pissed. Okay, you can say they weren't getting hurt all you want, but at the end of that war, those were the fucking Nazis.
Well, no, they weren't necessarily Nazis, but they were. They did feel like that they were. I mean, morale was really low, but then again, toward the end of the war, morale was low all over the place. Okay, let's go on down to the Turkey severs diplomatic relations with the United States.
Oh,
Come
pity they couldn't have stayed that way.
Action at Istanbul, once again, that's in this area of the world, right in the Mediterranean, Mesopotamian rather. And what's happening is there's a rush to take Baghdad, and then once Baghdad is taken, then the British win that race, right? Because there was kind of a race, to be honest, between the Russians and the British on who could take Baghdad.
That was kind of like the Russians and the Americans on Berlin, but the Russians ended up getting it.
Well, okay, we won't talk about that. We'll just let that go. All right. The second battle of the Scarp begins. This is a renewed attempt in the area that we were talking about at the very beginning, which is in this area.
Arras and Champagne, à toi.
All right. Dr. Augusto de Costa succeeds Dr. A.J. de Lameda as the Portuguese premier. Second German destroyer raid on Ramsgate. Guatemala, the great Guatemalan military severs diplomatic relations with Germany. And now finally, you have the United States Congress passing a bill to raise 500,000 men. Remember, we declared war
almost a month ago.
On the 6th, and on the 28th, 20 days later, you finally get a vote in Congress to increase the size of the army.
Yeah, well, you see, you had to give him some credit back in those days. You know, the bloody horrific fucking American education system and all that. I could see him taking 22 days to count how many men they got in their army to figure out how many more they need.
Okay, yeah, all jokes aside, I don't mind that the Republic moves a wee bit slow. This is a foreign war. Dude, I don't know. I think 500,000 is a little bit much. You would have had me arguing. I would have filibustered that shit.
Okay, well, on a sort of more tactical and strategic side of things, personally, I wouldn't have minded them having that extra 22 days to go into training and all this kind of stuff to at least give them a bit better experience, so when they do start getting bullets flung at them, that they've got that little bit extra behind them. So the quicker you guys got your shit together, the better off we were.
Yeah, you don't get my argument, though. We still shouldn't have been intervening at all. We shouldn't have been shipping over there. Like, why are we shipping in a war zone, people?
Because
like,
you already had trade. You
You
already had trade and commerce with them before. It was just the war got in the road of the shit that was going on normally. And you were just normally trading with people you were normally trading with because you weren't a part of the war. Therefore, like, you know, you didn't have that. But now you are. Yeah.
Americans are also dying in the high seas. Okay, so General Pétain is appointed chief of the French chief of staff. So Pétain, I was wrong. Pétain now takes control. All right. And at this point in time, there's a mutiny going on. All right. Many of the French soldiers are refusing to go on the offensive. All right. And Pétain is the one who has to deal with the fact that the French have felt like they've bled enough and they refuse to take offensive action. On May 2nd.
Wait a minute. No. Okay, it's one thing for somebody halfway across the world to look at it and go, you know, that's not really our fight. It's another for, hey, you could probably drive up there and see the front, and your cousin, your uncle, your second cousin, third cousin, and fourth cousin are either fighting or dead. Oh, you know, I don't want to fight for my country anymore. Screw this. Can I
It's
get
not-
can I
okay.
get lessons in German?
You're not. That's not what this was about.
No,
They would fight on the defensive. That they wouldn't fight on the offensive. They didn't want to go over the top anymore and just get mowed down.
Yeah, this is where I was saying earlier on with the first battle of the Artois and Champagne and all that. Like Neville had literally begged and pleaded to do this thing, and swore blind that it would work, and it went so horribly that that was the thing that the straw that broke the camel's back that dissolved the French government. And the French troops are there like, yes, we'll defend our country, not a problem, but don't just send us into a fucking meat grinder to simply friggin' die.
Right.
We're not doing that shit no more.
All right, because and I hate to say this, but the French officer corps was horrific.
Mm-hmm.
All right, they treated their men very poorly. They weren't like Pétain, who was trying to find ways, and it was always around the front. Pétain was one of the people who was always around the front, which is why the men trusted him. But that doesn't mean they're going to trust even their own majors or lieutenants when they tell them go over the top, because they've been over the top how many times and see literally hundreds of their buddies get mowed down before they even really got out of the trenches when they blew the whistle to go over the top.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you say treated badly, are you saying they still had the 19th century mentality when it came to running armies and disciplining?
Yes.
Or is it worse?
Go ahead.
There was still a lot of that, and it did get worse. But it was more the point of the French army just before World War One was the real poor cousin of the government's obligations and shit. And there was a lot of low morale. There was a lot of lack of discipline. A lot of units were just getting drunk while they're on duty and shit like that, and that was effectively their training and all this kind of stuff. So you got a lot of these blokes also too that see that their officer corps had let things get that bad, and now they know that we've been let down by our officers and we're now completely bloody screwed because any experience is now gone and we're all just dying. So it really was not a very professional organisation to begin with.
Yeah, and a lot of the problems with a lot of this happens when you've got to try and plus up your military very quickly.
Oh, that was another aspect of it too, because prior to the war, French's army, basically half of them were reservist conscripts, and it was literally one weekend a month or something like that, and then all of a sudden they get fucking called up to deployment, and they've got no training, no experience. Their officers are useless. They probably spent most of their training weekends just getting drunk down the chateau or something like that, and now they're going into this shit.
So anyway,
go ahead and continue, MC, if you want. That answered my question.
Okay. Mush in Armenia is reoccupied by the Turkish forces. Once again, Armenia is in this area here, so that people understand the region that we're dealing with.
That place that definitely did not have a you know what.
Well, according to Anna Kasparian, no, that did not happen. And remember, she is right because she's better than us. Remember?
Okay, well, we'll worry about that. We'll go on to the next thing. The first U.S. destroyer flotilla arrives at Queenstown, all right, on June 18th. All right, the third battle of Scarp begins because they keep trying to fight over the same land and they haven't killed enough people yet. The Battle of Bullecourt begins, which is just another part of that battle, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And then the Professor Lambros, the Greek premier, resigns and is succeeded by Major Zemius, or whatever. All right. The Asin, which we had showed before, was retaken by the French forces. The Battle of Third Scarp ends. And then the Battle of Vardar, all right, in Macedonia begins. And that's the Dorian frontier. That's this. All right. You're fighting in this kind of terrain. All right. And this right here is a Hungarian outpost, all right, that is looking down. You can see that this guy has binoculars, kind of like telescopic binoculars to
Oh,
peer at the enemies.
I thought he was wearing a furry suit, and it was just the ears.
But no, you can see that this is a tripod for a binocular right here. See?
It's memes. He's timeless.
All right, but this is the region. Basically, you'll notice that it's right above Greece, right, where all this battle line is taking place. All right, so they kind of, unfortunately, Greece wanted to stay neutral, but they basically get dragged into it, more or less. On the 10th of May, Major General Pershing is appointed to command.
Did I miss jumped a whole bunch there. Yeah, fuck yeah.
Oh,
you're on the 5th.
I apologize. That was the 5th. I'm sorry. The Liberia severs ties with Germany. Like now, okay, where's Liberia?
Next to Sierra Leone, West Africa. West Africa.
Here. Yeah. Here's Liberia. Liberia is a nation that was founded for the most part by expatriated American slaves.
Mm-hmm. Same as Sierra Leone, hence the capital's name, Freetown.
Okay, so and the local populace didn't like the Americanized ex-slaves coming there. So even today, there's a lot of animosity between the local populace and the invaders, as they talk about it in Monrovia.
See, this is the place I'm going to buy the tickets to all of those supposed African Americans who don't like America anymore and want to go back to their home country. Yes, I'll give you a one-way ticket to Liberia.
All right. The first night air raid on London, a single airplane by moonlight. Right.
I was waiting for this one. I actually looked this one up a few minutes ago. That was a Gotha 4, a twin-engine, basically their version of a heavy bomber.
This is a Gotha right here.
Pretty good. Thank you. They were producing quite a few numbers, but this was the technology. It had gotten. It's a lot bigger than the little single-engine reconnaissance aircraft, but the technology for your bomb sight is still the same.
Well, you can see how this thing is designed. It's designed as a push plane.
Yes, right? It's got two pusher engines in it. Specifically, that's just for that gunner up front. He's got a nice, good 180-degree field of fire.
Yeah, okay. And go ahead.
Just you can see between the landing gears an actual bomb, and I've been mentioning this before about the size of the munitions being dropped off an aircraft. That's pretty typical for a larger airdrop munition of the time, and as I mentioned before, they basically look like glorified mortar shells.
A lot of them actually are just mortar shells with different shapes.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, originally they were too. Yeah, that was literally the thing. The guy in the back seat would just literally take his little 60mm mortar bomb and just lean over the side and like, yeah, that looks about right. Drop.
It would really suck to be this guy up here because you know when you're seeing the enemy that you're the one who's right out there for everybody to play tag with. And while it's interesting you see how the gun is, this thing swiveled along this edge. Moving this around takes a little bit of training to get used to quickly maneuvering this weapon system around to fire at things.
Well,
exactly. Most of the time, your left hand would be on the mount itself, moving the gun, and your right hand would be the thing actually aiming it. Because the idea of putting both hands on it and moving and firing it at the same time that's not going to happen.
I think you'll find his largest issue is the fact that they didn't really give him face masks. Like they give him big jackets and like big fluffy hats and stuff like that to keep him warm. They didn't really have very much in the way of actual facial masks themselves. So, could you imagine how many flies this poor...
See, you got goggles.
Yeah, but could you imagine how many flies this poor cunt would have in his teeth by the time he got back down?
well, guys, that's actually part of the reason why pilots back then would always wear scarves. And another reason a lot of people don't think about is they wore scarves particularly in single-engine aircraft, because that spinning engine is slinging castor oil everywhere, and that was the whole reason for cowling, just to keep the shit off of you.
Okay, now we can get to finally to where the first Battle of Dorian ends, which we were talking about. The Major General Blackjack Pershing is appointed to command the U.S. Expeditionary Force. The 10th Battle of Isonzo begins. Now, this one I find quite interesting. I wasn't able to find any details on this, though, but this is quite interesting. The German airship L-22 is destroyed in the North Sea by British warships. They were actually able to shoot one of these things down out of the sky, apparently, huh?
Well, it is a Zeppelin. It's not moving that fast. I mean, like, you're trying to hit something with the top speed of continental drift, remember?
Yeah, but you're used to fighting the things on the ground, not things in the air and the water.
Well, think it this way: that Zeppelin can go about the same speed as a ship.
So
you're almost hitting a stationary target.
But the thing is that a ship isn't going to get dropped because some water hit it. So
I'm wondering if this is actually where the point where they've figured out that their airburst fragmentation shells can also work going up as well as down.
Okay, action between the Austrian and British naval light forces in the Straits of Otranto. 14 British drifters sunk. The British really took it on the shorts here. And where is this, if you're wondering? That is right here. This is the strait. Right between the toe of Italy, all right, and basically Greece and Albania, all right? Or the heel, not the toe, the heel of Italy, all right? And the British in this naval battle really did, the naval forces, they really did poorly, all right? They really underestimated the situation because, well, that's a habit the British tend to get into, all right, when they think that their navy is superior to everything that ever floated. All right, General Pietin succeeds Nivio, all right, which you were talking about before.
Yeah.
General Foch succeeds Pietin as the chief of the French General Staff.
Now, Foch, I'm fucking pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's Foch that comes in, and he's the French guy that goes, okay, this on-attack bullshit's got to stop. We're now going defensive from now on.
Yes. Major Kurisky succeeds General Kuchev as the Russian Minister for War. Tereshchenko succeeds Mulukiev as the Russian Foreign Minister. The Battle of Bullecourt has ended. Honduras severs ties with Germany. Now the great Honduras Expeditionary Force. The British Admiralty, following on cabinet decisions, appoint a committee in conjunction with the Ministry of Shipping to draw plans to finally convoy merchant ships.
Mm-hmm.
Huh?
So
finally,
all the way into May of 1917, the British refused to convoy.
Well, remember, this is still a new thing. Like, submarines are still a new thing, and like they hadn't had to do convoys before. This isn't like World War II where it's like, oh shit, what happened last time? So yeah, that is taking these old farts a lot of time to catch up with all of us young cunts, you know.
Okay.
I say that about these 100-year-old people.
No, and there's some truth to that. There is some truth to that. Okay. On May 18th, the draft. Now, remember, it was 20 days before after declaring war, before they actually authorized 500,000. Now it's like, okay, well, how do we get the 500,000? 20 more days passes before they actually institute, okay, we need to draft people.
Well, we didn't really have much of an army back then.
No, we did not. In fact, the 500,000 men All right, a call-up of 500,000 men hadn't been even close to being seen since the Civil War. Okay, and for the Americans, that was 70-something years ago, in most cases. So it's been a while, at least 60 years prior. Nicaragua severs diplomatic relations with Germany. Nicaragua held out, but the Hondurans joined, so they felt the pressure and they had to join.
I've got a feeling that in the big meeting with the Kaiser, eventually, every now and then, when one of these little nations that don't matter really at all, say, "Oh, we're gonna break relations," someone brings up to the Kaiser, and he just says, "So."
No, he doesn't. He goes, "Who?"
No. This is how that meeting went. It's the Germans go, "Where are you from?" Nicaragua. I need TP for my bunghole. Do you have TP for my bunghole? Nine, we not have nine TP for your bunghole.
No, it's like good. All of our ministers are needed for the front lines anyway, so it's a good job to send all the staff back. We have a position for them with a rifle. That's really what was going on. Okay. Now on the May 19th, this is critical because it spells the doom of the of Russia's fledgling democracy. All right, the Russian provisional government issues a declaration repudiating a separate peace. In other words, they're going to continue the war as long as Germany stays belligerent with the British and with the French. Russia will not sue for a separate peace.
See, this I think was the biggest mistake that the provisional government made, because war was already extremely unpopular amongst the people.
Right, from the Russian perspective, all right, this was devastating. But from the perspective of the United States and the Allies, believe it or not, this was critical.
Yes, because remember too, like, there's been like treaties and shit that been like conferences and stuff already been held with the Russians, and there's already agreements and whatnot. And politically, the Russian government should have spelt this out as more of a we're standing up for our friends who were standing up for us before. So while they're still at war, we'll still stand up for them, kind of thing, as opposed to like, well, we're still at the war regardless of what your opinion is.
All right. The United States government announces a decision to send a division of the United States Army to France at once. Basically, they've taken the entire U.S. military army and said, "Okay, all of you are on the way to France." Literally, a division is about all we have. The division is about 10,000 men, and that's really all the men we have under arms at that point. The Serbian government transfers to Corfu, or from Corfu to Sri Lanka. The Battle of Vadar, that's a typo. It says Yadar, but it's Vadar ends. Count Tisza, the Hungarian premier, resigns. Now this is somewhat showing the cracks, because if you remember right, the Hungarians, for the most part, they were kicking ass. The Hungarians, from their perspective, were beating the hell out of the Romanians. They beat the hell out of the Serbs. They've taken over a lot of this territory. They were winning, except for the fact that they are fighting a two-front war. Because while they're winning against the Serbs and they're winning against the Allied forces along the Grecian Peninsula, the Russians are on the other side of them and have made it into a pincher movement, and the people are suffering. Because, once again, deprivation and the fact that they've got to grab everybody to put into the war. The first great... Okay, go ahead. You going to say something?
I already looked this one up. The first great airplane raid on England I can't pronounce that word, to cause heavy casualties. Thank you. Total 290, over half civilians. This was the raid earlier this month with the single Gotha at night. That was a case of the guy got lost because, until the days of inertial navigation, which really didn't come about into the civilian sector until the 70s, you had dead reckoning. And this is the very primitive dead reckoning. The dead reckoning that even was 10 years later with Charles Lindbergh's transatlantic flight was a lot more advanced.
Yeah,
but
that is something
finally,
to point out.
We have a purposeful raid.
Yeah, the thing is though that's very important to point out is the flight across the Atlantic, right, hasn't taken place yet.
Exactly, it wouldn't take place until 1927. And if you actually take the time to look up what's called a flight computer, that thing is just two simple pieces of metal, but you can do a tremendous amount of math. You can do all your deviations for crosswinds. Like, think of it like swimming across a river. You can't just look at that little tree on the other side and swim towards that. You'll get there. You have to actually swim into the current to get across. Just crab your way across. Same thing with flying. But back in the First World War, they didn't know that, and they didn't really carry any charts with them. They just knew fly heading 275 for X amount of time, and then when you're over a city, drop.
Well, most of the time they were doing the aerial cartography as they were going themselves.
Exactly, that too. But this specific raid wasn't one guy getting lost. It was a purposeful 23 formation raid of Gothas.
Yeah, but how much damage from a war perspective did it really do?
This one quite a bit.
Yeah, they did quite a bit, but mostly what it did was just scare a whole bunch of people.
In comparison to all the other ones, right, like we've been talking about terror raids before, casualties were extremely minimal, but now this time we've actually got like 290 dead in this particular one, and it's half of it's over civilians, and that came out of nowhere too. So like the whole point of the whole raid was, okay, we didn't kill that many people in respect to say World War II or anything like that, but fucking these half of that 290 people were just people going about their business in their own homes. All of a sudden, fucking they go blow up, and there's no explanation. Well, shit, this could happen to everybody.
Exactly, and that airplane that got lost earlier this month, only one person died. So this is a really successful raid compared to that. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not making a giant effect.
No.
Okay.
No.
So then you have the British hospital ship, the Dover Castle, sunk by submarine in the Mediterranean. The Anglo-French Conference assembles in London to discuss the deposition of King Constantine of Greece and the occupation of Athens and Thessaly. May 29th, Voskuk de Dulu, the Persian Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, resigned. Now, this is the third resignation in about 6 months. All right.
Something like that, yeah.
Within Persia. And then finally, you have General Deventer succeeds General Hoskins in command of the British forces in East Africa. Was this more of a case of, okay, Hoskins is ready to come home and there's no real reason we'll just give this to Deventer because he's done everything that he can? Or was this a case of, well, Hoskins isn't getting the job done?
More the first one, and I think it was that like in the British Army, there's also a bit of a tradition that they'll have specialist officers doing specialist things. Like, say, for instance, in World War II, there was one dude that was just simply put in charge of rationing for the entire country. So, and as soon as he'd basically formulated the plan for the rationing, his job was done. He got fired and went on to do something else. I think you'll find, but with Hoskins, he was more of an advanced party kind of fella, because like we're looking at coming up to Beersheba and all that kind of stuff soon with the Turks and in Eastern Africa. So he was most likely there just to set everybody up. And you got Deventer, he's actually the bloke who's more the warfighter as opposed to the logistics guy. So you find out Hoskins has probably gone off somewhere else to start organising something else. but I could be wrong.
That's always a good way to do stuff too, I think. I mean, um, if you have somebody that specializes in something, then, have them do what they're good at.
Well, it's actually kind of a culture that's bred in the Australian Army. Basically, from the minute you hit basic, it's you find out in your section or in your platoon who's the one that's really good at like polishing boots. Right, he's doing all the platoon's boots. Right, who's good at cooking? Right, you're the fucking platoon chef, so he cooks every cunt's meal. So everyone's doing a task for everybody else, but it's only the dude that's the best at doing it is the one that's doing the task, kind of thing, and it all pays for itself. So like the dude who's polishing everybody's boots, he gets his meals cooked for him, his bed made, and his room cleaned and shit like that. So,
All right. Well, hopefully the weather here where I'm at, because I'm up in the Cascades, and snow is on the ground for the first time at my elevation this year, or well, this winter, I guess. So hopefully the weather will be good. Sunday, July 1917. America's still not ready, so this is still gonna be pretty much a British led thing, right?
No, this is a British and French endeavor still. It's going to be that way until the offensive is the offenses later on that are coming from the Germans. The Americans will begin pouring in. All right, but there was even then when the Americans finally start arriving on the shore, they're arriving without equipment. This is something that we can't really talk. We can't dodge. Is the fact that the Americans are coming with a rifle and the rest of them, and their bodies, and pretty much that's it.
Yeah, like I did a joke not a couple of episodes ago about the tankety tank thing. Like that's around that time. It was literally they were training with lumps of wood and a representation of sort of a gun and yelling out bang in their training, and they're getting to France and not even receiving their weapons until then. And in some of the weapons too, like there's the show machine gun or the show shot.
Show shot. Yes.
Depending on which way you want to pronounce it. There was two versions of them. There was an 8mm Lebel version, which is the French version, which was the really horrific one that everybody hated, renowned for being one of the worst ever machine guns ever invented. But the Americans built a 30 caliber version, which had a different magazine design and a few other bits and bobs, and it was way more reliable and it was way more better. But you left your American ones there because everyone wanted to issue you guys the French shitty ones when you got to France. So that was the kind of equipment that you're presented with when you got there, with very little training and experience and all this kind of stuff.
Well, to add on top of that, they also, if you ever want to look it up, the 1917 Enfield, there were a lot of Enfields that were chambered for 30-06. Oh, and with the show shot, the biggest reason that had such horrible the two biggest reasons had such horrible problems were the giant cutouts in the magazine so you could see how much ammunition you had left, which also meant you got a lot of mud in it, and the 8mm Lebel cartridge, which actually was designed off of the 11mm Craw, had a weird double shoulder that always made machine guns jam.
There's actually a third part which is pretty unique to the show shot itself, was that it had a reciprocating barrel in the recoil system, and there was a heat shield that surrounded the barrel. Now the problem was the tolerances between this heat shield and the barrel weren't that great, and when you fired a couple of hundred rounds through this thing, the barrel expanded, would seize up inside this heat shield and would refuse to move, effectively jamming up the gun. So you'd have to wait until it cooled down.
Forgot about that.
You have to wait till it cools down so it'll shrink, so the action would release and you could start using it again.
The show shot was a disaster from the get-go.
Oh no, the 30-06 one was actually really good. It's just that for some reason you never brought it with you. You trained on it and then you just left it behind. I think it was probably because of like a summer logistics thing. Like the French already had them there. They already had the 8mm ammo there. So instead of bringing over these new guns with the new ammo and the new logistics chain and that kind of stuff, I can see someone saying that makes sense somewhere along the line.
Now, what's interesting here is notice, and I want to point this out. See how these are silhouetted? These are the silhouettes that are now used in the U.S. military. All right, but the U.S. military trained initially not with these silhouettes, but with regular circular bullseye targets.
Well, you see the dude that's standing behind him.
Yeah, it's a Frenchman.
Yeah.
Well, another
So-
thing.
Which
A
is
lot of
where the French will always be, but that's a separate issue.
Another thing. These back then, every infantryman. Now they didn't get trained as well for this war because they just didn't have the time for them to actually learn to do it because it's an art. But they also learned how to use the M1907 sling, which, trust me, if you know how to use one, you can make laying prone. You can make inch groupings at 100 yards all day long.
The only problem is, why would you want to tie yourself into a rifle on such ungainly ground like the Western Front?
That's the issue.
Yeah, well, StreamYards does have us on a budget for time, so we will be blah. We will be back on Sunday with the World War I stream, and hopefully before then, if my weather holds up. That's why I haven't been streaming, guys. My internet's been in and out ever since the weather. Well, winter is here.
Should get Australian
Any
internet.
last words?
No, I'm good. Well, we're basically done. We're starting to move into what the U.S. is going to start doing. You'll see the U.S. start to ramp up some of its forces. The biggest advantage, of course, at the very beginning is the naval convoys, and that becomes the constant flow. It also creates desperation for the Germans. You're going to see the Germans react. One of the reactions that they take happens very soon. Because what they do is they send a secret train ride, all right, of a certain Vladimir Lenin and send him to Russia.
That was a brilliant move.
It
All
wasn't
right.
a short term.
Oh no!
We're still dealing with the effect of that fucking idea.
No, it worked. It worked in the long term too, because like he did a lot to keep the communists from taking over Germany for a great deal of time by killing a fuck ton of them.
I suppose. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good night. Good luck. Don't go to France. We're out of here.
Boobies.